Margaret Whitlow had become a ghost of the town, known but forgotten. Her small stone cottage stood nestled at the edge of Fernwood Forest, hidden behind ivy-covered walls and a weathered wooden gate. She lived a life of strict routine: up at 6, tea by the fire, garden at 7, soup at noon, and lights out by 9. Her only companions were the robins in her garden, an old cat named Whiskers, and the creaky wooden floorboards that spoke to her in the silence of the night. Years ago, her house had been full: children's laughter, birthday balloons, her husband's deep voice humming old songs in the kitchen. But life had a cruel way of emptying rooms. A car crash took her husband, and distance took her children. They called occasionally, once a month, sometimes less, but they had their own families now, their own lives far away. Margaret never blamed them. That's just how time moved on. The silence had become familiar, even comforting. She didn't mind her own company. She had books, her garden, and the memories wrapped in old photographs on the mantel. Though a part of her still ached, an ache that never fully left, a sense of peace had settled over her life. But that peace was shattered one rainy night in early spring. It had begun with a strange tension in the air, thunder rumbling in the distance, trees bending with the wind, and fat raindrops pelting the windows. Margaret had just finished locking the front door when a knock came, sharp, frantic, and completely unexpected. She froze. No one ever came out this far. Her nearest neighbor was half a mile away, and even the postman never bothered knocking. For a brief moment, she wondered if her ears had imagined it, but then it came again, louder, more desperate. With heart pounding and a candle in hand, she approached the door. She opened it just a crack, and there she was. A young woman, drenched to the bone, her clothes clinging to her shivering frame. She clutched a bundle tightly in her arms, shielding it from the rain. Her eyes were wide with fear, her lips blue from the cold. "Please," the woman whispered hoarsely. "Can we stay one night?" Margaret looked past her at the stormy woods, then back into the stranger's eyes. Something inside her, something maternal, long buried, stirred. She unlatched the door and stepped aside. "Come in, dear," she said softly. "You're safe here." As soon as the woman stepped inside, Margaret closed the door against the howling wind and latched it shut. The warmth of the cottage wrapped around them like a woolen shawl. The young woman stood trembling on the mat, rain dripping from her hair onto the wooden floor. She clutched the baby tighter as if afraid someone might rip her child from her arms. Margaret gently reached out. "Give me your coat, dear. You'll catch your death like that." The woman hesitated but finally nodded. Margaret helped her shrug off the soaked jacket and hung it by the fire to dry. She noticed bruises peeking from beneath the neckline of the woman's shirt. Her heart sank. "Sit," Margaret urged, gesturing toward the worn armchair by the fireplace. "Let me get you something warm." The baby began to stir and whimper softly. Margaret peeked over as she placed a kettle on the stove. The little girl couldn't have been more than a few months old, tiny fists waving, face red and scrunched in confusion. "What's her name?" Margaret asked gently. "Elena," the young woman replied, her voice barely audible. "Her name is Rose." "I'm Elena." Margaret nodded. "Rose. That's a beautiful name." She poured 2 cups of steaming chamomile tea and brought them to the fireplace. Elena cupped the mug with trembling hands, and her eyes welled with tears, not from the heat of the tea, but perhaps from the kindness, the warmth, the safety she hadn't felt in a long time. "I don't know where else to go," Elena whispered. "I walked for miles. I saw the light in your window." Margaret said nothing at first. She simply placed a hand on Elena's knee. A silent comfort. Later, Margaret brought out dry clothes, old but clean, and a woolen blanket. She helped Elena dress the baby in soft flannel. They made up a bed near the fireplace, where the baby finally drifted off, full and warm. As the storm outside raged through the trees, inside, the cottage glowed softly with firelight and the quiet rhythm of new life settling in. Margaret sat in her rocking chair across from the makeshift bed, watching Elena as she finally leaned back and closed her eyes. She had come for just one night. But something told Margaret she wouldn't be leaving so soon. The next morning, sunlight filtered through the gauzy curtains, casting golden patterns on the cottage walls. The storm had passed, leaving behind a fresh, earthy scent that drifted in through the open kitchen window. Birds chirped cheerfully outside, and the world felt renewed. Elena awoke slowly, disoriented for a moment, until her eyes settled on the stone fireplace, the baby sleeping soundly in the basket beside her, and Margaret humming softly as she stirred a pot of oatmeal on the stove. I didn't mean to sleep so long," Elena said, sitting up quickly. Margaret smiled gently. You needed rest. You've been running on fear and fumes. Oatmeal's almost ready. Elena hesitated. I can go today, if... Nonsense, Margaret interrupted, turning off the stove. You'll stay as long as you need to. And so, Elena stayed. One day turned into 3, then into a week. Margaret gave Elena a few chores around the cottage, not out of obligation, but to give her purpose. They picked herbs in the morning, baked bread in the afternoon, and washed laundry together in large wooden basins under the sun. In return, Elena began to bring laughter back into the old house. She hummed lullabies as she rocked baby Rose to sleep. She told stories of her childhood, some sad, some silly. She helped Margaret dust off old books and reorganize a forgotten sewing basket tucked behind a cupboard. Slowly, Margaret began to look forward to mornings again, not just for the tea, but for the sound of Rose's little giggles. One afternoon, while planting marigolds along the garden path, Elena finally opened up. He wasn't always cruel, she said, voice low. But once Rose was born, something changed. He'd scream, break things, threaten. I had to leave, even if it meant having nothing. Margaret looked at her hands in the dirt, remembering her own hardships, her own regrets. Leaving was brave, she said softly. You saved her, and yourself. Elena's eyes filled with tears. I never had a mother who said things like that. Margaret gently patted her hand. And I never thought I'd be a mother again. A deep silence followed, one not of awkwardness, but understanding. Two women from different worlds, scarred by life in different ways, had found healing in the shared rhythm of everyday living. And just like that, something shifted. This no longer felt like a temporary stay, it felt like the beginning of something new. Summer arrived gently, draping the forest in shades of green and gold. The days were longer, warmer, and filled with the sounds of life, birds nesting, bees buzzing in the garden, and the soft gurgles of baby Rose as she tried to sit up on her own. Elena had been with Margaret for nearly 2 months. What started as a night of desperation had transformed into a peaceful routine neither woman wanted to end. They shared responsibilities, meals, laughter, and even silence, the kind that no longer felt lonely. Margaret's neighbors, long accustomed to her reclusive ways, were surprised when she began appearing more frequently in town, usually with Elena by her side and baby Rose strapped snugly in a cloth sling. People stared, whispered, curious but respectful. One sunny morning, Margaret painted a new wooden sign and nailed it to the gate outside her cottage. In bright, cheerful letters it read, Whitlow and Rose Garden Home. When Mrs. Cartwright from the general store saw it, she tilted her head. A new business, Maggie. Margaret smiled, her eyes sparkling. No, just a new beginning. Later that week, Margaret hosted a small afternoon tea in her garden, something she hadn't done since her husband passed away. Neighbors came with pie and curiosity, meeting Elena and baby Rose properly. Some asked questions with kind interest, while others gave warm nods of welcome. It was as if the community had simply been waiting for Margaret to return to them, and Elena had given her a reason. Inside the cottage, Margaret had cleared out a small room and made it into a nursery. She taught Elena how to preserve fruit, patch old clothes, and make candles from beeswax. Elena, in turn, showed Margaret how to use her phone's camera to take pictures of the flowers, the baby, and even the meals they cooked together. One evening, as they watched the sunset from the porch, Elena quietly asked, "Are you sure we're not in your way?" Margaret turned to her and smiled. "You're not in my way, dear. You're the reason this house feels like a home again." Elena reached over and took Margaret's hand. Baby Rose cooed in her lap, tugging at a flower petal. It had all started with one stormy night and a single question. Can we stay one night? But now, none of them could imagine life without the others. They weren't just housemates. They were family.